MS is an autoimmune condition. And so what that means is your body's own immune system causes disruption. Your body sends immune cells into the central nervous system. They specifically attack this myelin sheath, this fatty substance protecting the neurons. They eat away at this. This causes a whole host of symptoms. And eventually, they can transect and kill that neuron, which causes permanent disability. And why does this happen? A lot of people might have heard about Epstein-Barr virus. This is the virus that causes mononucleosis. Low vitamin D levels. An interesting fact about MS is that the farther you go away from the equator, the higher the overall incidence and prevalence of this disease.
What is it that makes MS so difficult to treat?
It's difficult to treat because it's not one simple, consistent disease. It's very heterogeneous. The basis for it is this immune attack. And the immune attack itself is very complex and not fully understood. The wonderful thing is most patients today can get diagnosed relatively quickly because there's a plethora of disease-modifying therapies available.
Well, Jason, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, where are you calling in from? I think your company, Immunic, is based in New York, right? So I'm assuming you're in the New Jersey, New York corridor.
We are. So we're a New York City-based company right in Midtown. So I'm sitting right now in the middle of Manhattan. Yeah.
Awesome. I see. I mean, you've spent a lot of time. I mean, New Jersey, New York is sort of that biopharma corridor. And I know that's where I thought we'd start is I know you've had a lot of experience working in neurology and with big MS franchises. Could you give us a little bit of the backstory around kind of your previous work experience at Biogen and Novartis?
Sure. I've been in this business over 25 years. I started many, many years ago as a low man on the totem pole, if you will, as a primary care sales representative. And I've had the opportunity just to grow my career in a variety of different functions and roles, largely on the commercial side of the business, and then, of course, have evolved into general management. But over the years, I've played in a lot of different spaces, from cardiovascular disease, GI-related conditions, et cetera, but just fell into CNS, and it wasn't by design. I guess it was just generally by chance. I worked at a company in which we launched a new medicine for insomnia, and then parlayed that experience, to join Biogen. So I spent many, many years at Biogen, over 10 years at that company, and Biogen was really the flagship company, providing a number of therapeutic options in multiple sclerosis. So that was my first experience really in MS. And as you've mentioned, I left Biogen and had the opportunity to join Novartis to really help rebuild that franchise. They were a company that had the first oral product that was approved for the treatment of multiple sclerosis called Gilenya, and then evolved over time to have a series or a portfolio of products. So I had the opportunity to help build that there. Then I left MS for a while. I spent time at a company called Biogen Therapeutics, which is focusing largely on rare neurological disorders, rare epilepsies, and others, before I made my way back here. And so I'm at Immunic now, and as you've mentioned, we're a company that is developing a innovative small molecule therapy for relapsing forms of multiple sclerosis. Initially, we have an ongoing phase 3 program. We expect data from that in December of this year. And we've also announced that we're planning on kicking off by the end of the year a subsequent phase 3 program in primary progressive MS. So very exciting times.
They are exciting times, Jason. And I know just from my read of the neurology industry, and I know at Biogen too, right, being kind of the leader sort of in the space, everything they've been through with Alzheimer's drugs. And this is such an intractable disease area where there's such a huge unmet need. Can we maybe dive a little bit deeper into MS in particular? And for someone hearing about MS for the first time, could you just kind of explain kind of what's happening in the body? What is this? What are the underlying sort of pathology with MS?
Yeah, so MS is an autoimmune condition. And so what that means is your body's own immune system causes disruption. And in MS, it ultimately presents, with CNS or neurological related symptoms. So your central nervous system, we all know, is made up of your brain and spinal cord. And if we think of this as a big network of neurons, and these neurons send messages around the body, they tell your muscles to move, they help you feel things, they control balance, vision, things like that. And neurons are wrapped, you may remember from your middle school biology days, they're wrapped in a protective fatty, protective coating called myelin. And this acts really as insulation. Think about insulation around a wire. That's really what myelin does, and it protects the neurons. It not only protects, but also helps the messages travel quickly, travel smoothly around the brain. So in MS, your body's own immune system attacks specifically the myelin, it attacks this fatty protective covering to the neurons. And it eats away T and B cells and other immune cells implicated in this disease, astrocytes, microglia, et cetera. They eat away at this myelin sheath, and eventually, and this causes symptoms. There's inflammation, and depending on where it's happening in the brain, you'll have symptoms such as muscle weakness, you'll have blurred vision, you'll have numbness, tingling, vision problems, bowel, bladder problems, et cetera. So this is the inflammatory phase of the disease, but also it can eat away these T and B cells, these immune cells. They eat away at the myelin sheath, and they actually get to the body of the neuron called the axon, and they can transect or kill that axon and kill the neuron. And that's what ultimately causes permanent damage in the disease. So I think in summary here, we have an autoimmune condition. Your body sends immune cells into the central nervous system. They specifically attack this myelin sheath, this fatty substance protecting the neurons. They eat away at this. This causes a whole host of symptoms, and eventually, they can transect and kill that neuron, which causes permanent disability. And then, of course, that the next logical question is, well, why does this happen? And there's not a definitive, one reason as to why MS happens. There's a belief here that there's clearly a viral component to this disease. So a lot of people might have heard about Epstein-Barr virus. This is the virus that causes mononucleosis. This is strongly linked to the development of MS. It doesn't mean that everyone who's had Epstein-Barr is eventually going to develop MS, but in order to develop MS, you have to have been exposed to Epstein-Barr virus. There's genetic factors. So if a family member has MS, you're at a higher risk. There's environmental factors, right? So low vitamin D levels, right, which is often linked to low exposure to sunlight, is a risk factor. So an interesting fact about MS is that the farther you go away from the equator, the higher the overall incidence and prevalence of this disease. As you get closer to the equator, there's almost no prevalence of multiple sclerosis. And then there's other factors like smoking, obesity, et cetera. So that's a little bit about the disease.
So Jason, interesting. So my understanding of the disease is that current treatments, just really focus on suppressing the immune system, as you mentioned, being immune driven. So it sort of suppresses symptoms. So what is it that makes MS so difficult to treat?
It's difficult to treat because it's not one simple, consistent disease. It's very heterogeneous. So the disease itself behaves very different person by person. Right. And so as we think about the disease, I talked about it, that the basis for it is this immune attack. And the immune attack itself is very complex and not fully understood. Right. And so there's, again, multiple types of immune cells involved in this disease. And we still don't know exactly what triggers or sustains an attack. And therefore it makes it hard to target precisely. I think some other complexity specific to the disease is that, again, it's highly unpredictable. So symptoms come and go. Patients could be doing just fine, and then all of a sudden just worsen very suddenly. Other patients just have slow progression over time. So it's difficult to really know how the disease is going to evolve person by person. And then I think, thirdly, the damage, remember, this happens within your central nervous system. It happens in the brain. It happens in the spinal cord. And it's hard to access the central nervous system, right? It's hard to get drugs into the brain, and it's hard to repair the damage once it's been done. So it's a complex disease. While I think over the last, 30, 40, 50 years, there's been a lot of innovation and a lot of thorough understanding. We still don't completely understand the disease, and it's complex.
Can you maybe describe, just one more question around sort of the diagnostic odyssey? You hear sometimes patients having to go through a lot of different specialists before they land on a diagnosis. And I feel like MS might be one of those disease states where, I mean, maybe if you could walk us through from diagnosis to treatment, what does that typical MS journey look like for a patient today?
Yeah, in MS, actually, the patient journey is fairly straightforward. And so what happens is the patients will have some type of unusual symptom, as I've mentioned. They'll wake up one day and have blurred vision in one eye, or they'll wake up and they'll have a lower, weakness in their legs. They'll have numbness in extremities or something like that, and it doesn't go away, right? It lingers, and so at some point they seek medical attention. And normally, with these type of symptoms, even a primary care doctor are going to recognize that they're neurological symptoms, and so they'll oftentimes send the patient to a neurologist. The first thing a neurologist is going to do when they hear these type of symptoms and see these type of symptoms, they're going to send the patient to go get an MRI. And with the advancement of MRI technologies, it's the diagnosis has become a lot easier of this disease, and so you can do a simple MRI scan, and you're looking for inflammation in the brain. You're looking for lesions in the brain, and you can clearly see these lesions on MRI. And so, if the patient has presented with neurological symptoms, you do an MRI, you see these lesions consistent with multiple sclerosis. Well, that more or less is enough to confirm at least the initial stages and diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And so, as devastating as that may sound, as I've mentioned, there's been a lot of advancement over the last 30 years ago. There's nothing to treat these diseases. Now, in the relapsing forms of disease, there's upwards of 20 available therapies. And so once this diagnosis happens, that's when the clinician and the patient have begin discussions around starting treatment. And most patients start on what's called a disease-modifying therapy. So these medicines were designed to reduce the relapses or flare-ups associated with the disease. They're designed to slow disease and disability of progression. They're designed to prevent the formation of new lesions in the brain. And so once they're on a therapy, obviously the patients are constantly monitored. So for every 6 months or at least annually, and during the course of those visits, the doctors will do at least once a year, will do an MRI. So they want to see if there's any new MRI lesions forming in the brain. They're obviously going to talk a little bit about if there's any new neurological symptoms, if there's any just new symptoms in general, how they're tolerating the medicine. And if need be, they'll change the therapy if the patient is progressing or not tolerating the medicine, et cetera. So that the good news is there's lots of options. And then, of course, with MS, beyond being on a disease-modifying therapy, there's other symptoms associated with the disease, such as fatigue, spasticity or muscle stiffness, pain, things like that. And so there's going to be ancillary medicines that these patients are normally on. But in terms of looking at this glass half full, the wonderful thing is most patients today can get diagnosed relatively quickly because there's a plethora of disease-modifying therapies available. They can get on a therapy quickly, and more times than not, the patients will go on to live a fairly normal life. I mean, there was this misnomer. Well, many years ago, the diagnosis of MS largely meant it's not a matter of if, it's when you were going to end up in a wheelchair. And I think today, while that certainly still does happen for some patients, for a lot of patients, they can stave off, that degree of disability accumulation, or at least prolong it or delay it over time. So if 30 years ago, before the widespread availability of these therapies, a patient might have been diagnosed in their 20s or 30s. By the time they were 50, they'd be in a wheelchair. Today, they're still diagnosed in their maybe 20s or 30s. But instead of being in a wheelchair at 50, maybe they're in a wheelchair at 65 or 70 or something like that. So we have done a lot to address the disease, but there continues to be unmet need, and that's why we're doing the work that we're doing here at Immunic Therapeutics.
Really great overview. I appreciate that. And with that great setup, Jason, let's dive into your lead asset, vidofludimus calcium. I know it's you mentioned at the outset here that exciting year. You're expecting pivotal study results end of the year. Tell us a little bit about the program and what makes it different from other therapies that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So MS is a disease of both neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. And so in a perfect world, you have a medicine that will provide anti-inflammatory benefits, right, to address neuroinflammation. But you also have a medicine that is neuroprotective in nature to address the neurodegeneration. And I've mentioned there's 20 or so available therapies for the relapsing forms of the disease. And all of those medicines are really anti-inflammatory in their approach, right? So while they're addressing neuroinflammation, no medicine is really addressing this smoldering, underlying neurodegenerative component of the disease. And so vidofludimus calcium is designed to be a dual mechanistic approach. It's a selective inhibitor of an enzyme called DHODH, which we know is a proven approach to address inflammation. But it also is an activator of a nuclear receptor called NER1. which we know is a neuroprotective target. And so our medicine, we think, could be the first medicine that addresses, again, the totality of the disease by addressing both neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. It's taken once a day as a tablet, so it's convenient for patients as well. And so we're really excited about what we have.
So let's think about it. If you, not if, but when your phase 3 trial is successful, what does this, what would this mean for patients living with MS? Like, think about it. I mean, let's say if you're speaking to a patient who's been diagnosed, has already been through maybe some treatments, like where will vidofludimus calcium kind of fit in this sort of treatment algorithm, or where do you see it fitting in right now in the landscape?
Yeah. So it could fit in a lot of different areas. I mean, again, so when we think about MS, remember this is a chronic disease. So these individuals living with MS have to be on these medicines for a prolonged period. And because most of the medicines work by suppressing the immune system, there are concerns related to safety and long-term safety outcomes with many of these medicines. And so as we think about vidofludimus calcium, not only mechanistically is it unique, as I just discussed, it's this in a medicine addressing, again, both inflammation and neurodegeneration. Because it's unique in its mechanism, we believe it will provide potentially some advantages on the efficacy side, perhaps additional advantages on delaying and slowing down disability progression. But the data also supports that vidofludimus calcium seems to be relatively safe and well tolerated, right? And so in a disease that's a chronic disease, these are very, very important considerations. And so as we think about patients that could benefit from this medicine, there's lots of patients, right? Clearly a newly diagnosed patient, early in their disease, I think this would be a perfect medicine. Patients who prefer just oral disease-modifying therapies, as opposed to many of the other products that are either injectable, so you have to self-inject, or go to an infusion center to get some type of IV delivered medicine. Patients that just prefer the convenience of being able to take an oral tablet or pill at home, this would be a wonderful option for. There are, older patients, and as patients are living longer with this disease, we have patients that now have relapsing disease that are older in nature. And as just you and I age, as anyone ages, there's a natural phenomenon that's called immunosenescence that just kicks in which your body's own immune system just begins to wane and begins to slow down. And so you have to think about, there's concerns around providing immunosuppressive type therapies to older individuals living with MS. So again, we think our medicine, because vidofludimus calcium is an immunomodulator, it's not an immunosuppressant in its approach. And so it will offer advantages for older patients alike. So lots of different patients that could benefit. It's a unique profile. And again, we're very excited about the data we've generated to date.
So Jason, I know that, congratulations, by the way. I know you just finished up a new raise, a private placement that helps fund you through basically commercialization. You were brought on to kind of, in your role, to help operationalize the launch and launch readiness. So I'm wondering, let's talk a little bit about, with pivotal trial results this year, potential NDA filing next year, how are you approaching launch readiness and launch preparation? Given all the many hats that you've worn and all the different commercial roles, how are you thinking about that today?
Well, I mean, so you can never start too early, right? And in a perfect world with data in December, we plan on submitting a new drug application to the FDA by the end of the second quarter of 2027. We expect a standard review, which would mean in a perfect world, if everything goes right, we'll be launching the medicine by the middle of 2028. So a little over 2 years from now. And people say, wow, that's a long time. You got plenty of time, but we actually don't, right? You can never start planning too early, especially in a competitive space like multiple sclerosis. And so we've done a lot of preliminary work to understand adoption based upon, a base case target product profile. We've done a lot of work to understand forecasts, and we've done a lot of work to understand perceptions of the product in the marketplace and how we should think about positioning the different patient segments, the different clinician segments that we can go. So we've done a lot of preliminary work that will help to inform go-to-market strategy. Where we're at today, probably the most pivotal part of launch preparation is we're beginning to build out the team. So we're hiring. We just had an announcement yesterday. We have a new chief medical officer by the name of Dr. Michael Panzera, who joined the company. Mike is a trained neurologist and someone who's spent time not only treating MS patients, but has developed a number of the products that are successfully on the market today. So that's a wonderful addition to the organization. We've begun to build out our medical affairs organization. We hired another MS-trained neurologist by the name of Dr. Emily Evans, who's joined us as the Vice President of Medical Affairs. She's beginning to build out her team. We're going to shortly begin to put some medical science liaisons out into the field to begin educating the market, et cetera. So we're putting the key foundation, if you will, in place in terms of the leadership on the commercial side. We've done a lot of work on the strategy side to understand things. And of course, we'll be continuing the preparation work as we get through data. And as you've said it from your lips to God's ears, with some luck and positive data in December, then we just really accelerate the efforts in a post-December timeframe.
Just want to follow up on that question, Jason, given, you and I have been in the industry for a while, right? And I mean, from your earlier days, the launch readiness playbook looked the way it did, kind of a traditional pharma playbook. And I'm wondering, with all the technology options today and with AI and things, is there anything you can share publicly around kind of your thinking around how your go-to-market might have evolved with all the new ways to sort of, communicate with providers and patients?
Yeah, so the way that I would answer that is certainly the way that all of us consume information today is very different than it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so we as pharma need to continually adapt our strategies, right, to match the evolving landscape here. That said, personal promotion and the intimacy of two human beings having a conversation has not yet gone away, and I don't believe, and I hope that will never go away. So we have to stress the importance of building the right team with the right experience. And one of the things that we're planning on doing is we're holding ourselves very accountable to hiring an A+ level talent team, people with deep MS experience with relationships in this marketplace. And so we'll be able to leverage that via, again, our sales reps, our medical science liaisons, and other field-based roles. That is going to continue to be pivotal as the basis for the education and the awareness in the marketplace about what vidofludimus calcium is and how it could benefit patients. But of course, we'll also surround that personal promotion with other non-personal promotion efforts, and this will include AI, other digital tools and means. At the end of the day, you want to be sure that you can deliver information to a treating clinician when he or she wants that information and in a format that they want that information. And again, many of them still love meeting with the field-based teams, but others have a preference just for other delivery methods. And so we'll make sure that we have a comprehensive approach so that when we launch this medicine, and even in a post-launch setting, that we have high awareness of vidofludimus calcium, the differentiation, the value proposition of this medicine, and we'll continue to deliver those messages in a format to the customer base when and where they want to consume such information.
Jason, looking ahead to the next 12 or 18 months, and we've talked about a few of these already, but I want to give you the opportunity to share, like, in your own mind, what are some of the critical commercial or clinical milestones that our audience needs to be paying attention to?
So from an Immunic perspective, I think there's a couple of things. Obviously, first and foremost on everyone's mind, including ours, is the data readout in December. So we need to prepare to ensure that we have the top line data readout from our phase 3 ENSURE trials in relapsing MS that will be delivered by the end of the year. The second is the initiation of the phase 3 program in primary progressive multiple sclerosis. So we've talked a lot about 20 or so available therapies. Those are largely all for relapsing forms of multiple sclerosis. There's two subtypes of progressive multiple sclerosis. One is called secondary progressive MS, which there's no approved therapies for today. And then the second subtype of progressive disease is called primary progressive multiple sclerosis. There's only one therapy currently approved for primary progressive MS. And so we're very excited to kick off a phase 3 program with vidofludimus calcium in primary progressive MS because, again, there's just such an enormous unmet need to find therapeutic options for these patients that are in the progressive forms of the disease. We delivered data almost a year ago, last April, from a phase 2 exploratory study called the Caliber study. And in this particular data set, we took both patients with secondary progressive MS and with primary progressive MS. And we were able to show that vidofludimus calcium showed close to a 25% impact on delaying time to 24-week confirmed disability progression in the total cohort, including a 31% reduction in the primary progressive MS subtype. And so we're very encouraged by those data. And again, those data served as the impetus for this subsequent phase 3 program. So we'll kick that off by the end of the year. And then the other two things that that are key on our radar are in parallel here, preparing for the new drug application. This is a heavy lift for a small organization. It's the first time that we'll be doing this as an organization. And so you can't prepare enough in advance. So we've already begun the work there to lay the groundwork for a successful submission of a new drug application or an NDA, again by Q2 2027. And then of course we've talked a little bit about preparation for commercial launch that will continue. So these are the four main objectives right now of the company that we're delivering upon. And again, we're very excited, looking forward to some of these big catalysts.
Look, I have a full understanding of why you joined Immunic, because this is kind of what sales and marketers like you are kind of raised in the trenches. This is what we live for, right? Is bringing new innovative therapies to patients. And speaking of that, I mean, as we close this episode, Jason, what would you want a patient or caregiver to remember most about our conversation here today?
Well, so a couple of things. As scary as multiple sclerosis sounds, the good news is through thankful innovation from the biopharma industry over these last 30 years, there is now a plethora of options to treat patients, right? So patients, if you're out there and you're living with this disease and you've come across this podcast or you've just recently been diagnosed, I think the important thing to note is that there are options out there for you that can really help slow the natural history of this disease. So that's the first thing that I'd want people to understand. That said, patients still progress. And so we have not solved this disease. And we have not solved it because, again, the vast majority of these medicines are just addressing one component of disability accumulation, which is related to neuroinflammation. They're not addressing both underlying biological processes, again, neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. We hope with vidofludimus calcium, and I think a key takeaway for your audience is that the uniqueness of this product is that it may just do that. It may address both inflammation and also neurodegeneration. And you combine that with a convenient once-a-day tablet that's very safe and very well tolerated, we think we have a winner on our hands. And so we think that if successful, this would be a very, very viable option for many individuals living with multiple sclerosis in the near term in relapsing disease. And then, of course, roughly 4 years from now, when we have data in primary progressive MS, that would just be a windfall of an opportunity, not only for the company, but for the MS community, because again, there's a dire need for new novel approaches for progressive disease. And so in the near term, it's a differentiated asset for relapsing disease that we think can help patients, a segment of the disease that's not solved for. And in the more midterm, a potential huge upside for a medicine that could be the cornerstone of care in primary progressive MS 4 to 5 years down the road.
Jason, this is so exciting. Listening to you talk has got me excited. I tell you, we're gonna have to check back in with each other after your pivotal trial results and end of the year. Maybe have you back on the show. But with that, I think we'll let that be the last word for now. And thank you for joining us today.
I really enjoyed it, Chris. Thank you. And I'd love to come back on. Thank you for that.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the RX for Biotech podcast to hear directly from the leaders who are shaping the future of personalized medicines. And if you or someone you know is navigating a care journey, be sure to visit therapyforme.ai to search for a specialist near you. And if you need that extra support, be sure to schedule a virtual telehealth appointment with one of our nurse navigators who can help answer your questions. Thank you for listening.